Lovely. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name's Mike. I'm one of the Red Green operational transformation facilitators, and I'm going to be talking about the Home First discharge pathway and sort of the improvement journey that we've been on with establishing this pathway. So to start with, just to give everyone a brief understanding of what the Home First discharge pathway is, it's for any patients that are returning to their own home with care packages. So that's the primary sort of focus where we are aiming the Home First discharge model to be. And the improvement idea that we had was to move the acute hospital assessment of patients' care needs, rehab, and equipment into the patient's own home and not in the acute hospital. The benefits and the outcomes of doing this would be that we would be reducing social isolation and time spent in hospital for patients. We would also be reducing the risk of hospital-acquired infections and deconditioning because patients could be more independent in their own environment. We'd also be looking at reducing overprescription of services. As individuals, we are normally looking at erring with caution and risks. So we do sometimes overprescribe on the three sort of criteria that we were looking at in the improvement idea. But by reducing that overprescription, we could be looking at cost savings as well across the system. We're also looking at saving acute hospital therapy time. By not doing the full assessments, we are saving times for the therapists in the hospital to be doing other sort of assessments with patients. And we'd also be looking at improving health outcomes across BHR. In line with the hospital discharge policy, we are looking at discharge to assess models, whereby we're not making long-term decisions in hospitals about patients. So we assess patients in an alien environment in hospital and it's not their own home. And this is where the overprescription can come in. And also, we don't give these patients a chance to recuperate and recover in their own environment. So this is why we were looking to move towards this type of discharge model. So how we started with this, so in November of 2019, we did a small scale pilot on specific ward areas, and that was with 14 patients, and it just proved the concept worked. We managed to reduce the length of stay by 2.7 days on a whole for these patients. We also managed to save 2 to 3 hours per patient of therapy time, and this was done by using timed observation studies. And we also reduced the overprescription for patients. So just to give you a couple of examples. So if a patient was to go home with a care package needing 4 calls a day from carers, if once that patient was out at home, they only needed 2 calls a day, we were saving 2 care calls. So overall, with the 14 patients, we managed to save 17 reablement care calls once they were assessed in their own environment. We also saved 6 community rehab referrals because the care providers who provided the reablement care were able to do the progression for the patients rather than needing an additional service. So overall, as a system, we're allowing there to be greater capacity for other patients. So other patients in the hospital who may need these services would then be able to access them a lot easier. Once we did the small scale pilot, we went into a PDSA type innovation and creative thinking session. So we got all the key stakeholders in the room, and that was from the acute hospital, so the therapists, through to the community. So the care providers, the therapists who did the assessments in the home environment, as well as the voluntary sector. So that was the community matrons, British Red Cross, and Age UK, who are all involved in the discharge pathway. So what we did is we started by mapping the process with the key stakeholders and understanding who was involved in which part, and what needed to happen in each of those stages. We then did a little bit of wordplay and we did a little bit of Be Someone Else, which eventually led us on to seven ways of thinking. So we did the 7 ways of thinking around the question of, as a pilot group, how can we improve the process? And we came up with the bottom left picture of a couple of key areas that we thought needed to be developed. And then we did the 6 thinking hats. So in the top right and the middle picture on the top, that's a couple of our 6 thinking hats we did. So the smaller picture is around the process once patients were at home. And it was around patients not understanding who was coming in at what time, what was happening with them. So the solution to this was to establish a patient leaflet with clear defined timeframes for when the community services would be coming in to see the patient, rather than having all 5 come in at the same time. We managed to space them out over the course of a week. The other one, which was the key area for us, was around the dedicated transport. So we have to align our discharges with the community provision. So when these patients are discharged, because they haven't had the assessments in hospital, they have to be met at home by the community service. But with transport, it's a challenge, obviously, to do that matching up of that. So it was always understood that we felt like we needed dedicated transport, and we had the wildest ideas of, could we use a helicopter to avoid traffic on the roads? Really big ideas. But overall, when you pulled it back down to the tangible sort of measure we could do, we understood that we needed a service probably that was dedicated to the Home First that would be able to support this. The other barrier we had was we had to book in advance to ensure that we got those time slots. So if we needed a 10 a.m. call at the patient's home, we had to book by 4 p.m. the day before. And obviously, this created a delay in the patient's discharge, which we didn't want. So that was our big idea, and that's what we got from this meeting. So then from that point, in the improvement work that has taken place since 2019, when we first started the pilot, we were asking the therapist to type up the referral in an email, which we realized took some time. So we created this email template, which is in a single shared document for all the therapists to access. And it has some visual controls on it. So everything that's in red either needs to be deleted or amended to be relevant to the patient. We also created a single email point for each of the boroughs. So in the top of this template, you can see that there's a DL email. There's one for each borough, and that contains up to 8 to 10 emails, which the therapist would obviously manually have had to put in each time. Whereas now they just do the one email, and I can also control that email without causing too much disruption with the service. I can also monitor all the referrals. So because I've got the red to green inbox in that distribution list, I have oversight of every referral that's going through. So any individual feedback that I can give to therapists or the community, I'm able to manage those issues and log them and PDSA and review the services that we're providing. Also, within that email template, we have auditing built within the process. So at the bottom of the template, we have the proposed recommendations from the acute hospital, from the brief assessment we do. Then obviously, once the patient goes into the home environment, they have the community assessment where they provide what actually they will be giving the patient. So I'm able to compare the two now, and I can see what the differences are. So I understand the baseline from what we would have given to what actually has been provided. So that gives us like a huge wealth of knowledge to look at and improve. Another example of like PDSA, we have review meetings with the community partners, where I'm managing to maintain an issues log, which we review within these meetings. And that's how we're doing our PDSA and reviewing the service to make sure it meets the needs of the patients and the acute hospital and the community partners. I also have regular meetings with the Home First Therapy Champions. So we are obviously meeting with the therapist in the acute hospital and talking through any feedback, and I'm also feeding back to them. So that's how we've been doing the PDSA of all of the 3 boroughs. So just to round up, just to discuss some good news from the pilots that have been going on. So at the moment, Havering is live. It's the only way to discharge a patient now. So we are never making long-term decisions in Havering anymore. From a Redbridge and Barking and Dagenham aspect, they're still within their pilot stages. But going back to the 6 thinking hats and the dedicated vehicles, I managed to do a charity grant to NHS Charities Together during the pandemic. So also with donations from the Sir Captain Tom Moore Foundation, we managed to access 3 vehicles, which are purely dedicated to the Home First service. So now we can refer same day for discharges, and we know the transport's there for these patients. So there are 2 vehicles at Queen's Hospital and 1 at King George. And since the launch on the 10th of May, there's been 122 transport journeys so far that have taken place, which is brilliant because it just aligns with the community teams. And it was always a sticking point for us. So it's just fantastic that we've got it. So for the next 6 months, I'm reviewing that and feeding back to the charities team, as well as reviewing the services. The other really good news is that for Havering, which is business as usual, so far around 80% of the Home First patients being discharged down that route are not leaving that service with long-term care packages. So actually we're maintaining the independence of individuals in Havering and ensuring that the health outcomes are really good there. So it just proves that we shouldn't be making long-term decisions in an alien environment in hospital and letting patients recuperate at home before providing long-term care. But that's my Home First journey, and that's the improvement I've been on. And thank you very much for listening.